Today we will have the first in a series of podcasts that we will be broadcasting over the next few months on specific issues surrounding men's self-development. And the reason for this series of podcasts is that we are all witnessing a situation where men are increasingly isolated from one another, and in a culture which is dominated by all kinds of changing cultures, including the new ideology such as the increasingly aggressive feminist ideology, men are left victimized by those ideologies, but perhaps more importantly, they are left marginalized and deprived of mutual support, which traditionally has stemmed from close connections within the male group. So, devoid of this support by the male group and by the more experienced men, especially younger and middle-aged men, find themselves increasingly caught up in difficult situations in trying to establish emotional relationships with women. And some of these difficulties have found expression in the increasingly popular and productive industry of coaching for men with regard to romantic relationships. Now, this whole industry is a result of deeper problems, deeper seated issues that ought to be addressed psychotherapeutically and philosophically. And those issues include the energy perspective on male-female relationships, on partnering and romantic relationships in general, which is a perspective that is consistently neglected in modern studies of emotions, romance, and self-development. So what is the energy perspective on emotional relationships? It is basically a quantum-based theory which says that any kind of relationship where Jacques Lacan, the psychoanalyst, would say any kind of structure which fundamentally determines our psychological well-being, any kind of social structure, our relationship with significant others, including between men and women, is an energy system. So in order for this relationship to be pleasant to both parties, there must be a balance of energy within the relationship. And this is often reflected in the colloquial statements which people make when they meet each other. They say, I need to sense the energy. The energy of our exchange is good, or the energy of our exchange is unpleasant, or it repels me from the relationship. So basically this leads to the conclusion that when we enter relationships with anyone, not just men with women and vice versa, but any kind of social relationship, we need to take special care of the energy balance of that relationship. And that means that the amount of energy that we put in the relationship should somehow correspond to the capacity by the other person to receive our energy. And because we are so socially conditioned to various socially engineered roles in our romantic relationships, we usually approach romantic relationships with a huge disbalance of energy which we invest. Specifically, this means that most Western societies socialize men to try to conform to stereotypes of chivalry and initiative, to place expectations on themselves, to be the first to approach the women, to try to direct the relationship, to try to seduce the woman, to try to conquer the woman. And women are socialized, many women, not all, but most women, are socialized in Western cultures to wait for men to make their advance towards them, and then to consider the options with that particular man. And this is basically the stereotype which we have in fairy tales, where the knight, tries to conquer the heart of the maiden, and then proposes to the maiden, and then the maiden takes a couple of months to consider and see which other suitors she has, and then she gives him her answer. She is in this judicial position where she decides on the future of the relationship, and the man is socialized to place priority on the needs of the woman and not on his own needs, to be of service to the woman. So this extremely destructive stereotype has conditioned and socialized most of us men to place the needs of women above our own needs, and to approach relationships with a high focus of energy. And this leads to all kinds of problems which modern coaching practices interpret in various ways. And one of these ways is the famous concept of the shit test, which is very familiar in American partnership coaching. Basically, the concept of a shit test is the idea that primarily women, when they are approached by men who invest a disproportionate amount of energy in their first approach, an amount of energy which the woman does not at that particular point in time have the capacity to absorb within her own social life, the woman will test the man by acting inappropriately, by being late for meetings, for dates, by typing on her phone while on a date, by talking about difficulties at her work far too long during a date, by causing problems and difficulties to the man. And this is explained by evolutionary psychologists as some kind of behavior which tests the man as to whether the man has the stability, the stamina, and the strength to be the support to the woman in case of difficult situations in life. I'm not a great admirer of evolutionary psychology. In fact, I think it is completely nonsensical, because most of the principles that it is based upon really do not stand up to empirical scrutiny. But this is not my main theme here. What I'm trying to say is that a far more egalitarian and a far more productive way to understand these misunderstandings and these concepts which have now already found their ideological shape in concepts such as the shit test, is the energy perspective. Women or men or anyone else do not conduct deliberate shit tests. They simply act defensively in the way of reducing the energy which is directed at them at a time when their own relationship structure, when their own life as a whole, inclusive of all their other relationships, does not allow them the capacity to absorb such initiative. And this is the reason why it has been ingrained in our Western culture that men are ones who should initiate relationships and should invest themselves and be persistent and try to conquer the woman, to come to create a situation where the woman will start to belong to them, and the women are conditioned to resist, to hesitate, to consider, to check various options against each other, to always have several options open. And this causes a lot of problem in sexual relationships, in male-female relationships, which could basically be explained fairly simply. So what would be the general conclusion on a very preliminary and a very general level for the very start of this serial, for this very first and very brief podcast? It would basically be the idea, the assumption that we need to challenge the cultural engineering which is causing so much difficulty and so much discomfort in male-female relationships in attempts to establish quality partnerships, quality romantic partnerships, and that a greater focus should be placed on the needs of men, on the leading role of men in those relationships in the sense of establishing and maintaining an energy balance. Because it could well be that rather than expecting men to be knights who will besiege the tower where the maiden is imprisoned and try to liberate her and then propose to her while she waits and asks her father, the king, whom she should marry, and consider various suitors. Rather than that, it could well be that what women expect of men is a more traditional role of being the stabilizing force in their lives, of being partners who can help them to feel good, who can help them to manage their own internal energy dynamics, and who could basically manage the overall energy dynamics of the relationships. And in order to do that, men must first be able to understand their own needs and their own leading role, not in the sense of subsuming and subduing women, but in the sense of being the enlightened, the more enlightened partner, at least at the beginning, in the sense of understanding where the couple should go and how the relationship should develop in the context of balancing the capacities, the energy capacities and the energy potential of one and the other partner. This specifically means that in order to reduce this socially engineered first burst of energy, which is typically involved in men's first approach to women, and which is often mistakenly interpreted by feminists as some kind of male aggression, a seductive aggression, or an aggression to obtain a sexual partner. Rather than investing that energy in the initial approach to the woman, the men should develop their own sociality within the male group, and we need to revive the male group and create conditions for men to disperse and distribute their energy on various social structures, so that they have quality male friendships, that they have a high quality sociality with their environment, that they meet different women with whom they will exchange energy on different levels, so that their investment of energy in a particular woman, which is a woman of their choice as a potential romantic partner, is not so focused. So reducing the focus may lead to more gradual developments in male-female relationships and to lessening the stress of that relationship. But that also means reconceptualizing the leadership role that men typically play in the initial stages of establishing a romantic relationship, and that means that leadership should evolve from conquering, from seducing, from attracting women in a focused, in a planned, in a technical way. There are all kinds of technicalities and strategies that are taught in coaching today to attract women. Rather than doing that, it means leading what Giorgio Agamben calls a life which is based on the moral principle of sociality, developing one's own energy potential so that it is evenly distributed on various structures, various relationships, the most important of which are male relationships, membership in male groups. And we will be trying to develop a male group which will support men in self-development in this context, and this should lead to a changed situation vis-a-vis the women, which will reduce the emphasis on technique, on strategies, on psychological manipulation, which is prevalent today in coaching, and increase the emphasis on general attraction, which arises from an energy balance in the man's own life. So men's self-development here has very little to do with how we perceive women to be different from us, and a lot to do with how we try to re-engineer our social roles, which we have been socialized into and which are proving to be counterproductive.